This presentation will expand your ideas about what OER can be. My name is Debbie Walker, a faculty developer at Georgia Southern University. In this presentation, I have the honor of sharing OER projects created by 3 innovative and amazing faculty. First, you will meet Beulah, who revised a chemistry textbook and supplementary materials for her course, and then innovated by designing self-checking quizzes for her students to assess challenging content. Next, you'll meet Jason with his 2 Nations, 1 Land, reacting to the past game. And wrapping us up in true open pedagogy fashion, Virginia's students created a 100 Years of Fashion timeline and a project on fashion designers. Sit back and enjoy the possibilities.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Beulah Narendrapura. I'm in the Department of Biochemistry, Chemistry and Physics at Georgia Southern University. I'm going to discuss about the open access textbook that we implemented in a general chemistry course. Our team consists of 4 faculty from the chemistry department, 2 library personnel, and Deborah Walker from faculty center. So what did we do? We developed open access textbook, hosted it on a LibGuide platform. It's textbook plus supplemental resources, everything together. So students have everything at one place. We developed this for general chemistry course, Chem 1310. This is a 1-semester course for engineering majors. Basically, engineering students learn about how chemistry is related to engineering. They're basically learning about principles of chemistry and get to apply it to some engineering scenarios. So definitely cost savings is one of the motivating factors. But we also were motivated to provide major related content for the engineering majors. We wanted to provide them with examples and problems that were relevant to engineering. Moreover, existing textbooks, they are written from a 2-semester perspective, but we are teaching most of that content in 1 semester. So we needed a textbook that has the material reorganized. So we wanted to reorganize some of the chapters and examples and problems and create our own custom textbook. So we didn't start from scratch. Basically, most of the material that we compiled together was curated from other open access chemistry textbooks. Most of our material heavily came from OpenStax 2E. We reorganized some of the chapter content to suit what we were teaching the engineering majors. And we hosted it on a LibGuide platform. You can Google this link and you'll be able to see and use our textbook free of cost. What is LibGuides? LibGuides is a content management and information sharing platform specific to libraries. We chose LibGuides because our library personnel were already experienced in editing it and hosting and managing content on LibGuides. Moreover, we faculty were able to catch up to it easily. We needed a little knowledge of HTML, especially when we were formatting equations and embedding videos. And also, it did not cost us any extra. And we were able to get the custom look of the textbook using this LibGuides platform. So librarians were mostly involved in importing all that open access content into LibGuides, and faculty were involved in revising the content and putting new content such as videos. And then we cleaned it up together and finally launched it. So this LibGuide textbook, it not only contains open access infographics that are helpful to students, but it also has embedded multimedia such as YouTube videos and simulations to make the content more engaging to students and also helpful to students. During the COVID pandemic, this textbook has become a lifeline for students because it already has videos that were especially curated to aid student understanding of the material. It's well known that students these days just score the internet for videos that explain the material to them on demand. But sometimes they may not know which videos are best for them. So here we have curated videos that are especially helpful to students to understand the material. Each chapter is also supplemented with end of the chapter problem, along with answers. They were embedded as a PDF so students can download and work on the questions for practice. Another recent addition to the textbook are the self-assessment questions. These self-assessment questions are meant to provide students an opportunity to practice before exams. As you can see in the screen recording, each chapter is divided into 5 topics. Within each topic, we had 5 practice questions. The self-assessments provide immediate feedback, including targeted feedback for incorrect answers. And the multiple choice questions also, they allow students to identify common mistakes and pitfalls, and they model an exam-like environment. To provide learning support, the feedback for the questions is also sometimes linked to topics or worked out examples or videos within this LibGuide textbook. The project has also opened up opportunity for scholarship. We have 2 total projects going on based on this OER textbook we developed. One of them is analyzing how students use this textbook and how often they use the textbook in semester before and after LibGuides, basically comparing the 2 results through various semesters. We're still analyzing the results. Though not statistically significant, we saw a small increase in textbook usage in semesters where students are using the LibGuide textbook. And students commented that the textbook was good for note-taking, reading ahead, and especially said the sample problems or the end of the chapter problems were helpful in preparing for exams. Another project is the self-assessment project. What we did was we wanted to see how the self-assessment questions, along with some video support, some supplemental instruction, is going to help students to perform better on the exam. So we chose 6 topics that had low scores on previous final exams, and then assigned self-assessment questions for a grade in 1 semester. Along with the self-assessment questions, which were considered a quiz, students were also required to watch related videos with embedded questions to check their understanding on the basics before moving on to working on the quiz problem. So when we compared students in semesters before self-assessments with students in semesters where we were using self-assessments with the video coaching, we found a small increase in the correct answers to the topic questions on the final exam. We were using the same final exam questions in the control group and the treatment group. So this shows that self-assessment questions are helpful, and the video support is also helpful. Our next plan is to embed these concept review videos with embedded questions before each self-assessment into our textbook. We think that these videos with embedded questions that check the basics, they're especially helpful to students who are struggling in the course and need that extra support and motivation even to get started on working on these practice questions. So our project was funded by the Affordable Learning Georgia Round 14 Textbook Transformation Grant, and also the continuation grant for developing the self-assessments. So finally, this collaboration between faculty, academic librarians, and the faculty center, it has enabled us to create this open access textbook resource and also carry out total studies on it. While significantly reducing the textbook costs, this open access resource is comparable to any publisher resource in terms of student success. Student success did not change, or at least it didn't become less because of this open access textbook. And the added cost is free of cost is definitely a benefit to students. And moreover, it offers us the flexibility to edit or supplement this content in the future according to the needs of the students. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Slone. I'm a professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Georgia Southern University. I want to tell you about an OER project that was a lot of fun. Fun to do and fun to use in class. It's a role-playing game that I created to help students learn about the roots of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's called Two Nations, One Land. So let me tell you all about it here. A little bit of the history of the project. It's inspired by what's known as reacting to the past, which is historical immersion role-playing pedagogy. These are long-form games. They're not simulations. They're actually games where the outcome can differ in class from what happened in actual history. But students have to play the character during class, give a speech as if they're the character, write papers from the character's perspective, and so forth. And so there are a lot of games available already out there, but there wasn't one on the history roots of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and so I wanted to teach that. So I decided to try to write my own game, and so I decided to try to use OER material to, in part, speed up the publication of the game and get to play testing. If I had tried to write a game as a book and get it published with the press, it would have taken a lot longer than it did using OER. So that was one advantage. Of course, the cost was a factor. I wanted to save students some money. And I also used OER to do this project because I thought it was great for faculty. Allows it to be adaptable, I should say, to whatever your course topic is or your particular discipline. So the game is pretty basic, at least the foundations of it are pretty basic, and so it can be adapted for a history class or a religion class or philosophy class or international relations. It can be turned into a post-colonial game. So you can, if you're a faculty member and you're interested in using the game in your class, you can use the materials that I've created, and then you can add to those materials very easily because they are OER. You can add your own OER materials and, like I said, adapt it and target it to whatever course you're teaching. Really about 18 months, I wrote the student game book, which all students get who are playing the game. It's saved as a PDF, and it has a lot of hot links to OER, to online sites and so forth. A lot of maps, those kinds of things that are important for this particular game. It's also, I wrote an instructor's manual, so if you, it not only teaches you about the game and how to play this game, but about reacting to the past in general, like how these games work. So if you're new to reacting, you still are able to play the game with just the going through the instructor manual, the instructions part of the game. And it also includes roll sheets. And so every student gets a copy of the game book, and then every individual student gets one individual roll sheet. We don't share roll sheets. That's part of the game setup because each student character has different victory objectives to win the game. And so I want class to be engaging and quote-unquote fun, but fun doesn't mean easy. And so it's certainly this topic is not an easy topic, but these reacting to the past games are engaging enough, I feel like, that it allows them to engage with difficult material. So the setting for the game is in Palestine in 1947. There was a movement that developed in the late 19th century among European Jews to move back home, from their perspective back home. And so you begin a slow migration in the early part of the 20th century back to Palestine, which Zionist Jews believe to be rightfully their homeland. This is known as the Great Aliyah. But the migration numbers picked up significantly, of course, before, during, and after World War II. So 1947 is the end of the war. The Holocaust has just happened, of course. And as a result of World War I, Palestine's technically legally under the control of the British, but the British have decided to leave and hand over, quote unquote, the problem of Palestine to the United Nations. And so Jewish leaders began lobbying the United Nations for them to create a Jewish state, so that Jews could have their own state, and therefore, in their eyes, feel safer and be able to build a military to defend themselves and so forth. And so the UN is given this quote unquote problem of Palestine, and the way they approach trying to figure out what to do with the situation is they create a special committee on Palestine known as the UNSCOP. So the game centers around the work of the UNSCOP. There's a picture of the actual UNSCOP. So another cool thing about OER is I'm able to pull up maps, pictures, and so forth, which students really like. It sort of brings it to life for them. There are basically one team, of course, the Arabs of Palestine, and these are the roll sheets. These are real characters from history, and so one student will be assigned for each of these characters, and they're able to look up the biographies and lives and the pictures of these actual people, again, bringing it to life for them. This is the Zionist team. And then the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, these were the actual members. Not all of them, but enough for my number of roll sheets I needed for my game. There's also a special role for Dr. Ralph Bunch, who was from the United States. He served as a special liaison. And the UNSCOP is supposed to be neutral, but 3 of the UNSCOP members were kind of biased towards creating Israel. 2 were biased against creating Israel. and 6 are neutral, is the way I set the game up, just to create a little bit of tension and intrigue there. And there's also a couple of roles for journalists in this game, and these were also real journalists who were covering this event in history. And so after a couple of sessions, we usually 3 game prep sessions. Session numbers 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are, and the beginning of 9 are gameplay sessions. And I always encourage students to bring their technology to class because they can do OER research on the fly. So if somebody on the Arab team makes a claim about something, students on the Zionist team can look it up quickly and try to refute it or bring up a different map or a demographic data point or something like that. So it's another advantage of OER is that students are kind of doing research really on the fly, and they're learning to evaluate sources, and so they're getting some information literacy practice and so forth and so on. So the way that gameplay sessions are set up in this game, in the first game session, we debate option A, which is do not create Israel. And then so there are speeches given by members of the two sides. And then the next class, we debate option B, which is to take the entire British Mandate of Palestine and turn it into Israel. Those are probably not viable options, either one of those, for the United Nations members, because the United Nations members win the game, so to speak. They achieve their victory objectives if they can get people on both sides to agree to some kind of solution. And so it's probably going to have to be a 2-state solution is how the game really plays out. And then the question is, what does that look like? One option, option C, we debate for a whole class session. That is one nation divided into 2 states. And so you have to look at what that would look like in terms of federal government versus state control, language, schools, all kinds of issues there you can debate. And again, if you're using this game, you can tweak it and adapt it to whatever your interests and needs are for the course. And then the last option, option D, we debate is partition into 2 nations. If you know anything about global history at this time, it's at the same time where the partition of India had just happened with tragic consequences. So that's brought into the game as well. Like students are made aware that partition had just happened in India, and there are certain consequences to that. So then in the 5th session, the United Nations members give speeches. They sort of show their cards, if you will, and they let everybody in the class know how they're planning on voting and why. But they don't take a vote, and this is kind of a little gamified element here. That could happen on a Monday, and then they meet for class again on Wednesday for the final vote, and that gives the students time to lobby outside of class, and the students get really creative with lobbying. I think one class they were trying pizza and a few other things, but we get together for the final gameplay session. There's a final discussion, debate, and an attempt by both sides to persuade UN members to change their vote or whatever. And then we take the final vote, and that's the end of the game. And then I take one more class session after that. We call it a postmortem to try to unpack what happened during the actual game, and then compare that with what happened in real life in history. And again, these are not simulations, they're actually games, so the outcomes can be different in the game than from what happened in real life. And we talk about that, how things could have gone different ways in history. And so in this particular case, we draw connections. We look at the various Arab-Israeli wars, and you can even connect it all the way up to events of 9/11, again, depending on what your course interests are. So.
Welcome. My name is Dr. Rolling. I work at Georgia Southern University in fashion, and I'm excited to talk to you about a couple of open educational resource projects that I've worked on with students over the course of a couple of semesters. So let's dive right in. I'm going to go ahead and share with you my screen. So here, there's actually 2 projects. One is for fall of 2022 and then spring of 2023. And for the first project, I'm just going to open it up for us here. You can actually see where we took and did a fashion decades timeline. So what happened with this particular project is kind of correlating how events, things in history had impacted fashion. So getting students to do group work, team-based work was exciting, and they got to be paired into groups by decades and then figure out what in that decade was important. So here's a great example. So in the 1900s, the bicycle, the invention of the bicycle drastically changed how clothing shifted, right? Because of thinking about safety on bicycles. Also, the white wedding dress was something influenced by a political leader, Queen Victoria. So that was something that students picked up on. And of course, the afternoon dress. And of course, as we go forward, we'll see some different things. So the hobble skirt became pretty big. Ford Model T car, of course, changed how people dressed and what was appropriate. And then, of course, ladies' hats. And it goes forward, and I'm not going to spend too much time, but it's interesting to look at what students came up with as far as an open educational project. So we had librarians came in, talked about looking for the correct images, what would be open access, how to actually attribute that. So they had to learn that. Apart from just trying to figure out how to articulate what the image means and why it would be important for that decade. So this was a really great project. It's something that students can come back to for other semesters, so they get to learn from other students' work. And of course, this is all student led, so it's their own language and of course what they feel is important. So it's really great to see the progress and the work that they came up with, and seeing some of those images that had come out of it and some of that work. So these are just a few examples that goes all the way up through to the 21st century. And I'm just going to kind of skip forward here, but you can kind of see some of the highlighted themes. And this was a really fun project for students to not only think about those connections in history and how that influences attire, but also the attribution process. So I'm going to skip forward now to spring of 2023, because this project was a little bit different. In this particular project, it was outlined what the project would entail. So pretty much having that librarian support, where again, they would come in to the classroom and the librarians would talk about what is open access, how do you find those images, and properly give attribution for that. So this project was unique because instead of focusing on decades, we focused on fashion designers. And so the first group picked Vivienne Westwood, and you can see it goes all the way down to Bob Mackie for group 5. But again, just looking in and seeing, some of the important imagery of that particular designer, what they're known for, what they kind of brought to the table. So this is one good example. Another example, we can go to group 2 here and see some other open educational resources. And they wrote up a brief summation of who the designer was, their birth date, if they had passed, what that date would be, where they were from, what they were known for. So those kind of interesting images were brought into play there as well. And so it's been a really great opportunity for students to work together, learning the collaboration process, being able to have that language together. One thing that really helped in the midst of doing this project was having each student contribute. So points were awarded according to everyone participating and doing a contribution. So each student would find an image, talk about that image, and together put into the summary what they had learned. So I hope this is exciting to you. I hope this is something that maybe you can incorporate into your classroom situation. And thank you so much. It was a pleasure to speak to you today about this innovative technique of really collaborating with our librarians, also doing team-based learning, and getting students kind of in that discussion of what is open educational resource, and how to properly attribute for those images so that they are in the right protocol. So thank you so much and have a wonderful day.